It is my absolute pleasure to be joined today by Douglas Schroeder. He is the son of the author Arno Schroeder, who wrote many stories, and Douglas put those stories together in a book called On God's Payroll. And so, Douglas, tell us about this book.
Well, the book On God's Peril is really the best way to characterize it, in my opinion. It's an unintentional autobiography. And the question would be, what do you mean by unintentional? Well, I would think that most people who start to write an autobiography start with an outline of their life and decide what they want to put in, decide probably what they don't want to put in as well, and then how transparent and authentic to be. Do I say this way or this that way? That's not how this happened, and that's really the key to this. So my dad is a member of the greatest generation, born in 1925, passed away in 1922. He had all these life experiences, and that I, as a growing up kid, heard about them. He had these stories he told me, and they're funny stories. We'll get into that in a few minutes. And then there's life stories of becoming a frontline Marine in Okinawa during World War II. And as he got into his senior years, he told those same stories to my kids, his grandkids, and they enjoyed him. And now there's another generation coming. And I pressed Dad in his 80s, said, Dad, you need to write these stories down. We need to preserve these stories. And he says, no. And you can guess it took a long time to get him to do that. He didn't want to do it. But he begrudgingly finally said, okay, I'll write a few stories. Maybe I got a half a dozen of them. Well, he started writing stories, and he wrote stories of his life as he thought about them. They're 2, 3, 4 page stories. Mainly the primary ones were the life on the farm. That's the majority of them. But they morphed into other stories as he went along. And so over a period of literally 13 years, he wrote over 200 stories of his life. And I get emotional about that. And so now we've got all those. He wrote them in no special order, here, there, every which way, as he thought of them, had interactions with his older brother as they talked about the farm and reminisced and wrote those stories down. So now I've got all these stories, and what do I do with them? And I wanted to preserve them for the family. But when you do that, you can't just put them together the way he wrote them. It makes no sense of his life. So the unintentional autobiography is then that I took those and sifted and sorted and edited those into a, if you will, a readable document.
That's incredible. And so, I mean, and obviously we've talked about this already. I mean, and what an amazing inspiration, and a way to secure his legacy, moving forward. I've recently lost someone too, where we've all said to each other, I wish we would have had him write those stories. And so it really hits home for me, and I know for a lot of people, but it's so special that you had him do that. But what was that main point of inspiration where you said, you know what, I've got all these stories, I'm going to publish this book, I'm going to create this book? What was that
Yeah.
main point of inspiration?
There are two things, really. The most immediate thing is what you would expect. I wanted to honor my dad and his legacy, and I wanted to preserve his story of his life for the future generations. But as I did that, and as I read those stories, there's a lot more to his life than just the stories. And if you were to ask me the question, so why should anybody want to read this book? Apart from this unintentional biography, like if you like reading biographies, there's an incredible amount of authenticity and transparency, because he wasn't trying to say, oh my goodness, what if I say it this way? That's really bad. What if I don't say this? What if I include that? Don't include that. So that's all gone. So it's really an excellent book of his life and transparency of that. But apart from that, there's 4 other things that I've come up with that says, here's why you need to read the book. And what then, as I put it together, motivated me to go through all this hassle of publishing it, doing these interviews, trying to market the book, because there's something that I believe a broader audience will generate with. And those 4 things are, if you like Huck Finn Tom Sawyer stories, the Swiss Family Robinson stories. My dad was a real Huck Finn. He was a Tom Sawyer. You can't believe all the things that he got into and did as a kid on the farm. He's into everything, doing everything, and it
He
would
was
take
ornery. Yeah.
yeah, it would take an hour just for me to talk about those things. So that's one. Second, if you're a history buff and you really want to know what life is like growing up on the prairies of South Dakota during the Depression years of the 20s and 30s with no electricity, sleeping on a straw mattress till he's 18 years old, read this book because it's a great story. Third, if you're another history buff and want to understand what happens when a 20-year-old Mennonite boy, raised boy, goes off to war, leaves his farm home, goes off to boot camp in the Marines, thousands of miles away from home, and then hits the beaches of Okinawa on May 1st of 1945 as a young recruit, and 8 weeks later is the old man of the outfit. And what that 8 weeks did in changing his life physically, emotionally, and mentally for the next 77 years of his life, you need to read this book because it's real and it's true. Now, he didn't write a lot of stories directly of combat because he wouldn't do that. His combat experiences. There's one story when it was really an auto tape of what he shared with the family one period that we then typed up that audio and included in this book. That's a really impactful 24-hour period that was very meaningful to him that I can mention in a minute. But also there's an appendix to this book which was penned by his brother, and it's much more directly about those war experiences. And so we're indebted to his brother's family for allowing us to include that as an appendix. Fourth is really the overarching story. As you read this story, my dad, I come from a faith heritage that goes back hundreds of years to when his ancestors were burned at the stake for their faith. And that heritage has continued to dad and in a personalized way, and woven through this entire book is you can tell that his personal identity is in sync with his personal and integral daily walk with his Savior, Jesus Christ. And it is there, it is a part of this book, it is a part of his life. So you take those four things, and that's why you should read the book.
Those are some pretty amazing four things. And I know this is emotional to talk about. I understand completely. And that's okay. That's okay, because you're honoring someone that's amazing who had lived his faith, right? Lived it in every sense of the way, and yet was still honoring and had fun, but experienced so many things in life that, a lot of us have not dealt with, right? And so what a great way to honor him. I think that's incredible. So is there anything else you'd like to share with us today about you, your book, or the message around the
Yeah, that doesn't even include, so I didn't even include in those four things. So when he's now 60, 65 years old, I can't remember the exact year, he then becomes a big game hunter. So at 60, 65, he drops a 2,300 pound buffalo out on the prairies of South Dakota. He knocks off a running elk in the mountains of Idaho at 300 yards. He goes up to Canada, shoots a bear and a moose. My dad was a doer, okay, and he the book talks about himself being a restless boy, and that's why he always got into stuff. He just never stopped doing, and that's why in his senior years it was just hard for him to not do a lot of stuff and become more reflective. But that was also what allowed him to do that was his belief. The epilogue, in the epilogue is one writing that we actually copied the words. Everything else we typed up and wrote, but that's the last story. And I found in his papers, he called it On the Other Side. And it was his view and excitement of looking forward to personally seeing and meeting Jesus. and completing that walk of faith in such a way that he honored the relationships that he had with his Lord, and he was not fearful of death. He approached death, and he wrote about that, how death was something to be embraced rather than feared.
Incredible. And just what an amazing man, just amazing man, that you have honored in this way. And it's always nice whenever it's like you get to look at someone who lived a life of faith and you get to at the end celebrate their life, right? And he had no regrets, I bet. He sounds like a doer that just kept going and going. And what an amazing man. I think it's incredible that you guys have put this book together. Pick this book up today on Amazon. It's available online everywhere books are sold: Amazon, Apple Books, Reader House, all of those places. And so be sure to pick that up. And Douglas, you've been an absolute delight to talk to today. And I'm just so impressed that you honored your dad in such a way. And I'm excited to hear more from you.
Thank you.